Appreciate all of you for joining us for the Hudl Swish 21 panel. This is the topic on basketball decision making. We're going to kind of jump into things here pretty quickly, but I do want to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. So, Doug, why don't you go ahead and start us off, and then we'll work our way around. Why don't you tell us who you are, where you are now, and then maybe any background information that may be applicable or helpful for our discussion tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So Doug Brotherton, I'm the coordinator of player development at the University of Tulsa with the women's basketball program, and came here after spending 9 years down at the Village School in Houston, Texas. And so I've been fortunate enough to be at different levels of basketball and just love any opportunity like this to learn from all of you and, share some things that have worked for us.
Aaron, why don't you go next?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Aaron Fernandez. I'm the assistant women's basketball coach at Roanoke College in Virginia. Was previous basketball stop was with Davidson College's director of player development, and I was also at Mars Hill University as an assistant coach and interim head coach, and was a high school coach and teacher before that on the boys and girls side. So I've also coached several youth teams. So I've literally been at every level from third grade through high school through D1, D2, and D3. And all the decision-making stuff we're going to talk about is applicable to whatever level or boys or girls that you're coaching at.
I'm Andrew Wingreen, video coordinator at Stetson University with the men's basketball program. And before this, I was a Division III head coach up in Pennsylvania, and had a few stops before that. But way back when I started was on the same staff with Tony, and had a 5 good years there at Bob Jones University, but really excited to be with everyone today and talk a little bit about decision making.
And I'm Tony Miller. As Andrew said, I'm at Bob Jones University. I'm the assistant coach there. I also oversee the sports coaching master's program that we have there at the university. So I'm in the business of training and helping coaches. And that's hopefully what we're going to be doing here with this panel discussion, help you work with your players in this area of decision making and make them better decision makers. When I get a group of players and sometimes even coaches together, I'll ask them sometimes what's the most important skill or skills in the area of basketball. And usually the first response I get is shooting, for obvious reasons. The coaches, kids often respond with defense because, of course, defense wins championships, according to the t-shirts. And then I get something like passing or dribbling, but rarely do I get decision making. Aaron, you and I have had this conversation before. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, when we as coaches are looking at what we want to work on, and especially if you're more the traditional mold, you're working on your skill sets in more of an isolation setting, and I think there is a time and place for that. But at the end of the day, basketball is about being able to make, and any team sport is about being able to make the correct decision. It doesn't matter if you have any of this quote unquote skill set if you don't understand when to use that skill set. So I'm a believer in the kind of the big picture first approach. So I think if players understand when to use things and how when to make those decisions, I think that whenever you go back and you're working on those skills, even if it is in isolation, is a better understanding of why it is that you're doing what you're doing. And I had this discussion today with my former high school coach that I actually coached with for 8 years as well, who asked me what the same question: what's the most important thing to be working on right now? And that was my answer today. It's decision making. So just ensuring that we're setting our players up to understand when to make those decisions and when to put those skills that we're practicing into use. To me, is the number one thing. So if you can get that down, all those other things are secondary.
Chances are that if you're watching this, you probably do value decision making, and it is one of those skills that you mentioned. But just for clarity's sake, when we talk about decision making, again, one of those maybe buzzwords in today's game. But Doug, why don't you talk from an offensive perspective? Why don't you talk to us about maybe the specifics of what decisions are or what you're drilling in decision making drills when you are practicing those things in practices?
Yeah, I think Aaron kind of touched on when he was talking about kind of where and when to do things. And so offensively, that can be when to put it on the floor, where and when to share it. It's really kind of, in my opinion, teaching players how to read the game and what's going on around them. And I think, so often, I know I was guilty of this early in my coaching career. I really scripted a lot of what was going on. I wanted it to look pretty and be in straight lines and everything look really good. And I think decision making is where we kind of teach the players to make us look good when we don't have control, and that's pretty scary and pretty difficult at times. But all of those base fundamentals that we talk about in shooting, passing, dribbling, when to cut, when to space, are all parts of decision making. But it's kind of the scary part of coaching that we might not spend enough time on because it'll make our practices not look as pretty or as good.
Oftentimes we usually hear decision making in the context of offense, but I think that if we were to think through it a little bit more, it's equally as important on the defensive end. It's just that necessarily we don't think about. I think a lot of defense is we think it's just reactionary. So I just, based off what the offense does, I just react to it. But even those reactions can be decisions when you have a lot of times either or situations. Andrew, I know you've been in charge of defenses. What decision-making skills are you focusing on within a practice session?
Yeah, I think oftentimes we do, we talk about decision making, but what does that look like? And I think defensively, it is so oftentimes we just react to a situation. We see a defender, catch a ball in a pass, and he may be a good shooter, so we run out and we close out. Like, we react to him catching the ball. He dribbles the ball, tries to go in for a layup. We react with our help defense. But I think more so than reacting on defense, we really have to go on the offensive and make it where we dictate the pace, we dictate the tempo. And you see so many of the best best defensive teams in the country, Wisconsin, Virginia, teams like that. They do a great job dictating everything that the offense does. It's not, typically the offense is in a position to dictate what happens. But when we sometimes talk about these 3 levels of closeouts per se, but even going a step further, like if I know that so-and-so is a really good shooter, I'm going to dictate exactly what he does by running out with my hands up, because my hands are down, he's going to shoot. So I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to go as close as I can, maybe even fly by him to make him dictate that he is going to put the ball on the floor. And I know that he can make a decision after that. But if I know a guy can really get to the paint, really, a good mid-range pull-up or whatever, I'm going to dictate that he's going to shoot the basketball by maybe closing out with just a hand on, keep my hands down a little bit, giving him some space, but just having that mindset of dictating what he's going to do. And I think so many times, we just get complacent and fall into the trap of reacting to what an offense does instead of dictating what they do with our decisions.
And for the sake of those who are listening to this and you're thinking, they think that they're coming up with something new. We don't think that we're coming up with something new or talking about something new. We've described this for years, probably most coaches, as these are our high IQ players. But I think that for us now, we're trying to figure out how do we turn more of our players into those high IQ players. And so within the context of practice now, do you all feel like it's something where your skills, the player skills, physical skills that we've been discussing, that those should be taught first and then decision making? Or is it decision making first, then the skills? Or is it a combination of the two? I know, Aaron, you have some thoughts with this one if you want to start us off with it.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear everyone else's thoughts. And I don't know that there's a specific right answer. I know that I firmly believe that decision making comes first before anything else. I think you can work on the skills within the context. You're working on the skills within the context of anything you're doing decision making wise. But I think that anything that you can do to focus on the decision making piece, because what is a skill? I think that's something that you and I have had a discussion about, is what truly makes a skill. The skill is the ability to execute it at the right time. So dribbling against cones, while someone may be super skilled at doing that, if they cannot do it in a game, are they even actually truly skilled? Are they truly skilled ball handler? If they can pass, on air, but they get a game and they just turn it over when they pass it, are they actually truly a skilled passer or skilled shooter if they can shoot in an empty gym, but they can't hit one or make the right decision in the game? So to me, the skill is the ability to make the decision and then execute it, based off that right decision. So to me, whether I was coaching younger kids or college age kids or high school kids, whatever, I always wanted to make sure I was focused on the decision-making piece first. And then, really complementing those good decisions. And then it gives you an idea of where you need to go back and maybe refine those skills, but really putting them in situations to make multiple decisions every single day, skill development practice.
Yeah, I'll jump in and piggyback off of that a little bit. You know, I love that Aaron started it off by saying there might not be a right or wrong answer. I think we get into these either or questions and tend to deal in absolutes. And I just feel like when it comes to skill or decision making, there's nothing wrong with starting off by teaching technique and having kind of a baseline level of skill, because it's going to allow your players to explore decision making at a higher level. So I would tend to, I'm going to sit right there in the middle on the fence and say that I think both of them are things that we'd probably jump right in with. And I don't really know how we're going to teach a lot of decision making without a certain level of skill being necessary or required. So it probably depends on the level. I think we've all been at different levels and been able to go a little deeper into decision making, but it really is, in my opinion, predicated on the level of base skill that group of players have. And so I'm kind of hesitant to say one's more important than the other, and I think we'll all probably fall in there. But I think that decision making should follow very quickly behind technique, and there should be more time spent on decision making than on the technique of acquiring that particular skill. Because to Aaron's point, you got to be able to execute it.
Yeah, and if I could, real quick, before Andrew hops in here, because I'm curious to hear what he has to say. But I think we've all been teachers at some level, and I think if we look at, and I'm sure people watching this have been teachers or are teachers, and that in your classroom, for sometimes you can lecture all day, and you're going to have kids that retain every bit of everything you're saying, and some kids need that hands-on. So I think understanding your team and what they need and what level, where they're specifically at mentally or whatever, or skill wise, I think that plays into it too. So I don't think it's a one size fits all approach. I do think people learn in different ways, but the brain does acquire skills in a specific way. But how you get to that point where the brain is ready to acquire that skill is going to be dependent on how well you know your team. So I just want to kind of add that as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're talking about, kind of comparing decision-making first or skills first, because truthfully, I feel like decision-making is a skill. It's something that we can learn to do. So I don't know if there's really an either or. I think even more so what we need to be teaching in our workouts and as we kind of develop these decisions, the skill, our skills inform our attributes, and the attribute of decision-making that we're looking for in our players is decisiveness. And really the only difference between decisiveness and decision-making is the speed at which it occurs, right? So, I mean, we can look at all the analytics. If I'm running a business, I can take a bunch of time and look at numbers, look at personnel, and I can say, all right, I'm going to make a decision to do this. I can take the time, right? It's a skill I have. But in basketball, we don't always have the time, as you're going off a ball screen and they maybe defend it, they ice it or they down it or whatever. You have to make a decision really fast. And that comes down to decisiveness. So I think, as we kind of develop this, that decisiveness is what's going to create the trust and establish our credibility. If we don't have that, that's just going to, if we're indecisive or we take too long to make that decision, that's when we lose our credibility. And that's when, we start creating that distrust with our team. But I think that's a really good mindset just to have as we do workouts with our players, as we watch film with them, we really look at the way they make their decisions, the way they perform that skill. And I think what we're looking for is a decisive way of doing that.
You guys have started down the path, so let's go ahead and just keep going down it here. How do you go about teaching decision making, whether that's what it looks like or how you go about doing it, or even how you teach players on an individual level how to be better decision makers? Doug, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think the easiest way I've tried to explain it to coaches, and this was for me something that I've gotten better at and I'm still trying to improve on over the years, is you're just trying to recreate the situations you're going to see most in the game. And if you kind of reverse engineer it that way and say, okay, we're going to be a Euro ball screen team. My kids are going to be in a ton of ball screens. Well, if you're doing it on air, you're really not helping them to develop the ability to make the plays they're going to need to in a game. And so some of the best drills and ways that we've taught decision making has actually just been literally recreating situations from games, and it's a lot of fun with our staff to do that. And so I would say that's a big part of it. And the other thing that's really overlooked a lot of times in trying to teach decision making is creating that environment where mistakes are okay, and you're going to allow kids to explore and give them time to have multiple reps where they can use whatever feedback they receive from one rep to then go ahead and get put back into that situation and try to adapt and learn. I think that different solutions work for different kids. And we tend to want to tell kids, if this happens, this is exactly what you need to do. That might not be the solution for that particular player. And so, giving them that freedom and creating that environment, I think really helps foster the growth that you want in decision making. But it's pretty scary as a coach because, it can get pretty weird sometimes in your practices, and you just have to take the approach. You have the long game, and your kids are going to be really equipped by the end of the season.
Doug, that's so powerful, being able to empower our players to make those decisions and to make mistakes, because I think it was Teddy Roosevelt said, in leadership, like the best thing you can do is the right thing. The second best thing you can do is the wrong thing, but the worst thing you can do is nothing. And I think so many times our players, they get frozen because coach is going to yell at them if they turn the ball over. Like, I come off a ball screen, I see the tag, I hit the lift guy, but it gets picked off, right? And now next time, if I just got screamed at, like, what are you doing? I may just not make a decision next time. I may just come off the ball screen, hold on to the ball, pull it back, and now my whole offense is shot, right? So I think just empowering our players, that's so important into the decision-making process, because as we allow them to make mistakes, because it is going to happen. And that's where, I think we're probably going to talk about some film study, but that's where the film study is so powerful, because now we can show exactly what was happening in that situation, correct those mistakes, so the next time they can be empowered and confident to make the right decision.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, I think there's two points I would like to make is that you're just talking about empowering them. So I think one of the things that I tried to do, especially at the youth levels, where sometimes the skill is lagging or it takes them an extra second to make a decision, and then it results in a turnover, for example, like a pass or a shot that they should have shot earlier that all of a sudden turns into a block shot, is just praising the decision making, even if it's not executed correctly. So if someone makes the right decision, but it's just off the mark, the pass is just off the mark, or they might pull up for a shot and it's the right shot and it's a complete air ball or whatever it is, that we're praising those decisions, especially early in the process. But then we're also teaching our players how to be resilient as well. So we don't have to be hard on them if they make a mistake, but they're most likely, I think we're all probably coached the same way, but they're going to have played for coaches before they get to you that were super hard on them for mistakes. So I think it's our job, especially as coaches, trying to teach decision making, is how to be resilient, how to understand that, like you said, Andrew, like if you make the right decision, great. Make the wrong decision, it's still a positive that we can take and build on. And it wasn't a wasted opportunity or a wasted chance. It's still something we can learn from. And just helping our players understand that that resiliency piece is a huge piece to becoming a better player, being able to make the decision, make the wrong decision, understand what happened, go back and be willing to try it again, and understanding that you're still going to make more mistakes as you go through that process. And it's going to be sloppy at times. And also as coaches, Doug, you talked about it's going to be chaotic at times. So we have to be willing to kind of set aside our egos as well and be resilient as coaches. Understanding that some days if we're going to want to pull our hair out, that's okay, because you're playing that long game. So,
yeah.
A couple practical applications that I would encourage coaches to think about. One is something that Doug said. He said, I'm going to teach them what to see. And I think a large part of decision making is teaching players where to look. I've kind of associated this with like being a quarterback in football. I know we're not doing football, but you describe a quarterback early on. The quarterbacks that are the young quarterbacks know what the plays are, but they oftentimes will lock on to like one receiver or two receivers. The older, more experienced coaches will know their progressions and be able to work through those very quickly. And then the really experienced ones know what's going to happen before it happens. They have that, we describe it as like the high IQ. They just know what's going to happen before it happens. I credit Doug Lamov with this, but talking about, perception and just teaching players where to look on a floor. So you guys have been talking about like ball screens. Okay, so when a guy comes off a ball screen, what should he be looking at? Well, younger players will often be focused in on the ball screen defender that's maybe hedging at them and he completely misses the roll guy or the trap. And so, we've seen it with our younger players. Their eyes just kind of dart all over the place. They don't have that quiet eye where they can focus in on what they're supposed to be focusing on. And by the time you get your players to be the juniors and the seniors, they're skilled enough and have the decision-making experience enough that they just make the right reads. That's not an accident. I think a large part comes to, we talk about, well, that guy just doesn't have enough game experience. you should be getting your players game experience in your practices. The guys have talked about like messy practices. Us coaches, especially us college coaches, don't like that because we're control freaks and we want to control and manipulate every scenario. But if you live with those messy practices, while it's not just rolling the ball out and letting them just play, but putting constraints on small-sided games and using 3-on-3, 4-on-4, getting a lot of reps for all of your players, not just randomly playing 5-on-5. I think those are the kinds of things that can improve the decision making and things that I have seen accelerate the decision making, especially of some of our younger players. And again, just something I've been thinking about, and I've got a lot of young players this year that I'll be employing this with and hoping to see some improvement. Andrew, you talked about the film, and that's the next thing that I want to talk about, because I do think film plays a large part in decision making. I don't know that it's always been described that way by coaches, but a lot of times we just talk about watching film. And in essence, what we're trying to do is show players how to make different or better decisions using their gameplay or using whatever film you're watching as an example. How do you all take what you're seeing on film and help your players become better decision makers? Andrew?
Yeah. I mean, we talk so much about, you just mentioned experience, right? And experience is a really good teacher. I think going through something teaches you a lot and you can learn a lot, but the learnability aspect can compensate for a lot of lack of experience, because not every player is going to go through the same situation in a game. They might have seen it, they might have heard about it, but like they may not experience it. So how are they going to grow through it? How are they going to learn to make a decision in that moment? So, film is really powerful for us, because obviously when it happens in a game to our players, we can go through that. We can talk through the process, what he saw, what he didn't see, what the defense was doing, and we can really break it down. But how do we, maybe we're going to play a team who's icing a ball screen, and we have a freshman point guard who's never seen an iced ball screen before. So he's never experienced it. How are we going to make sure that he knows the decision making? Well, we can pull up a lot of NBA clips and say, okay, here's Chris Paul. Watch what he's looking at. Watch where his eyes are. Do you see what the defense is doing? This is what's going to happen to you tomorrow. Tomorrow night, they're going to ice. They're going to be here. They're going to be here. We have to look to make this play. So I think just, really understanding the learnability aspect and encouraging our players with that is super powerful. And I think for coaches, it's really important to kind of know, I think Aaron, you talked about, our brain and how our brain is wired in decision making. And like, I was reading a book called The Attributes, and I may mess this up a little bit, but I think there's 4 things that our brain processes through, situational awareness, through decision making. And it's, first we have a script, and then there's a pattern, and then there's a category, and then there's context. So basically a script is, I'll use a defensive term. Okay. So a script would be, when I box out, I get a rebound. Okay. It's something that when I do this, I know this is going to happen. And then we establish a pattern, which would be every time that I box out, I get a rebound. So our brain starts to establish these patterns. And then we put it into a category, which would be rebounding. Okay. And then at the end, the context is going to be overall defense. So we kind of have to work backwards and know when we're on defense, we're trying to get a rebound. My brain is getting trained that if I want to get that rebound, I have to box out. And there's so many areas of a game where we do that with the closeout, with the shot. Like if a defender closes out at me a certain way, I know my brain automatically trains itself to start doing this. And through film study, as we understand how the brain works, we're starting to point out these patterns and helping our players establish patterns so their brains start focusing on, okay, I know when I do this, this is going to happen. And suddenly it starts turning in, their brain puts it into categories and they automatically start referencing things and pulling these things out quick. And now we talked about that decisiveness. It comes to full fruition because we're talking about it. We're training our brains. Just like any other skill, decision making is something that can be learned and can be grown with. So I think that's a really powerful way to use film, just kind of knowing what we're looking at and helping our players understand what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to. That's awesome. That's such good stuff. I would just say, I think that for us, I've always felt like film can remove some of the emotions that cause stubbornness when we're on the floor. And that's for coaches and for players. I'm absolutely guilty of that. And so that's one thing that I enjoy about film is being able to sit down with a player and say, okay, deep breath. This is going to be frustrating. Let's go look through, some of the decisions that were made and then try to use that to ask questions. We try to do that on the floor, but we all know players are really competitive. Coaches are really competitive. And you try to ask a kid a question after they've turned it over twice in a row against, a coverage or on a drive, and you say, why did you do that? It triggers defensiveness, and that's when I talked earlier about that environment we're trying to create. Film allows you a chance to go back and kind of revisit whatever that situation was, and then just like Andrew said, it also allows you to be proactive and use other examples, which is awesome for players to see, other players making some of those decisions and being put in the same spot that they'll be in. So it's just a really good tool to teach. And again, I think if done properly can be great for players to just kind of unpack what's going through their brain in a non-threatening way.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to talk about film was that, what we used to do as a high school coach, and I would encourage people to kind of change maybe the way they look at film, and I'm sure there are coaches who are already doing this, but we were very small-sided games, kind of random variable, staff. And what we tried to do was watch film, see where we were messing up, and then create some sort of small-sided situation for us to be able to work on those specific decisions. So I know early in my career, what I would have done is say, okay, we're turning the ball over a lot, so we're going to do whatever passing role we had in our arsenal. Instead of thinking about the specific context in which those turnovers were occurring and those decisions were occurring, and then maybe setting up something to replicate that. So we were running ball screens one year and we were turning the ball over on our wing ball screen. We're going to set up some kind of wing ball screen, small-sided game or something to rep that out and to be able to talk about what was happening. We would be watching those clips, before practice, and be going out and executing those in practice. So that's just one of the things I wanted to kind of throw out. I think, excuse me, I have a chest cold. Sorry. One of the things that I want coaches. Sorry, you're gonna have to edit this out. Yeah.
Aaron, while you're catching your breath here, like I can kind of jump on. You're doing these small-sided games, right? You're talking through all these different options, decisions we have to make, and like we need to give our players, the toolbox, the roadmap in order to make these decisions. Like, I say roadmap. You're driving to work, and maybe the traffic's bad. Like you start knowing a different way to go, right? Okay, if the traffic's bad here, I got to take this route to get to work. Oh, there's a construction here. Like you do it enough, like you start learning, okay, what else can I do? What other options do I have? And so as you watch film, as you do these small-sided games, as you do workouts, like we got to give our players that roadmap of when option A breaks down, here's what option B is. When option B breaks down, here's option C. And obviously through experience, through reps, like that just keeps building these decision-making skills. And I think it's so powerful. It is. We have to talk about that stuff as coaches, because if we don't give our players that roadmap, they're not going to know what to do. Like they're going to wing it and they're going to go out there and make mistakes, which again is fine to make mistakes, but like we want to expedite the process and we want to make it as efficient as possible. So just, as coaches, give them the big picture, give them the options, give them the roadmap to what they're doing on the floor so their decision makings can really grow.
Let me say one more thing about film, and then we'll finish up talking about the games that you all have talked about. But something that has really helped our program, I'll put a plug in for it. We have the Hudl Focus camera. And what that has allowed us to do is basically at any point during a practice, we don't always have the manpower to stick somebody up in the stands. That may be your only way to go, and that's fine. But to pull out your iPad, we have the Hudl Focus camera. We can basically just turn on right away, record a 5 or 6 minute. Most of our small-sided game sessions are only about 6 minutes long. And I have basically 5 times the amount of film now, because most of us are operating primarily off of game footage. I know a lot of you are still doing film in your practices, which is great, but I can just pull it out, turn it on, turn it off, and now I have a 6 minute clip that I can go back and show a kid. And I can basically, again, focus in on something particular because I've put within those small-sided games constraints, as was already said. If we're struggling with ball screens, then I have 6 minutes and 6 minutes straight right after clip after clip after clip after clip after clip about just ball screens, and we can focus in on that one thing. So I think even from a coach's perspective, that can expedite the situation, because how many times have we all sat trying to follow or pulling up, even on Synergy, pulling up, all right, what's happening in the ball screen? How many times is this kid in the ball screen? You may not all have that within your budget to be able to get something like that, but it's available to you on a Hudl app where you can again go back and record that. And with the video plus the data, you can make your team better decision makers. And so let me go ahead and finish off. We'll finish off talking about decision making tonight with the topic of the drills and the small sided games. And my question for each of you, I would like for each of you to kind of summarize. It could be even something that you've discussed already, but the biggest advantages that you found for using more decision-making drills and those small-sided games within your practices. I think from talking with each of you separately and kind of interacting with you on the internet, I've seen that most of us, I think, are using or have used even more games and gone to that more games approach than even when we started, or that we were a part of when we were players. I know Aaron's still pretty young in his coaching career, but like from what he did playing wise to now coaching wise, and the reason behind that being what for you all? Aaron, you want to start?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage and one of the reasons we made the transition in the first place is we wanted this was when when I was a high school coach, is we wanted our kids to have fun also. So not only were we struggling to win games, but we weren't no longer having fun because all we were doing was kind of the traditional kind of things that we knew and that we had grown up with and that we had been taught. And we were successful for a little bit and then things kind of fell off. And so, we realized things weren't really transferring to games. But we also realized our kids weren't having fun at all. And they didn't want to come to practice. They didn't want to come to workouts. And it was a double-edged sword, partly because we're losing, but also, that it's fun to play. It's fun to explore. Even if they're making mistakes, even though they may be frustrated in a moment, it's still more fun than kind of the traditional type of drills you're going to do. And I'm not saying that, if you're a coach who uses those, that you should completely abandon those. I think there are times and places where those can be helpful and useful. And as much as I'm a small-sided games guy, and I think that's how probably most people know me as a coach. Like, yeah, I still have a place in my practices and development sessions for block and kind of traditional stuff, and that's okay. But yeah, I think that was the biggest advantage, and we saw the rewards from that the very next season. I think with 4 wins to, I don't know, I think we ended up at like 16 wins or something, and then for the next 4 or 5 years until I moved on, they continue to average about that many wins or more. So I think that that was the biggest thing for me is fun and hard work don't have to be incompatible. That's what we talked about here at Roanoke, and the ability for our kids to not only to improve but to have fun and to be eager to come to practice and to compete and to be in those small-sided game situations. It's just is also a huge plus as well.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that, especially the idea about it being fun. It really helped our environment with kids wanting to show up in the off season. He's spot on. The kids want to play. And so what's a way that we can let kids play, but do it in a way that allows us to get better and be really intentional and purposeful. So that was a great solution for us. It's also just by nature, I like to play fast and a more free-flowing style, and I like our teams to be able to do that. And so throughout my coaching career, it was just trying to find ways to be more comfortable when things kind of got a little out of control. And so teaching the decision-making and doing that was really helpful. I think it allows kids to, as we've all said, understand and read the game and make decisions quicker. I love that Andrew has used the word decisiveness. I wrote that down. I hope everyone else did as well. If we can help our players be decisive, it's going to really fuel that attacking mentality that we say we want our kids to have. But the decision making and the way that we do all of our different small-sided games also, really feeds into what every coach says they want, which is a more competitive practice. And I think that gets lost in the way that we design that sometimes. It's really hard to be competitive when you're doing, these kind of old school drills that are, you can put a time and score up there, but shoot, let's split teams up and go to work. And we created a competition chart that we charted wins and losses for everything. But again, we were able to do that in a way that we always kind of teach that technique, teach whatever we're trying to do. To Andrew's point earlier, show them the solutions and the things we want them to explore, give them a little bit of time to explore that. And then let's go play and let's compete and let's, see who can figure it out the quickest. And so I think coaches, there'll be a discomfort as they dive into to doing some of the small-sided games we're talking about, but it actually is going to feed the exact thing that they, all coaches say they want in practice, which is for practices to flow, for them to be really competitive, and for their kids to get better.
I mean, as we referenced at the beginning of this show, the 5VO stuff against cones doesn't work with decisions. Like you can't make a decision when you're not going against anything. So the competitiveness is so huge, regardless of how you do it, whether it's 5-on-5, small-sided games, but you have to be competing. And I think the more film we can have of competition, the more stuff we can show our guys, the more experience they can obtain. Like they're going to go through it and they're going to get more reps. And so now we're going to have more data to pull, to help these guys grow in their decision making. And, you both referenced the having fun aspect of it. Like how many of us have made a decision in life where we were upset and it wasn't the right decision, right? We're in a bad mood, we're upset, things aren't going our way, our body language sucks, and we make a decision. Like it doesn't usually work out well. So I think as coaches, we keep that in the back of our mind. Like when things are fun and guys are, maybe they do make a bad play, like we got to keep their body language right. We got to keep their mentality right. We talk so much about mindset, and mindset is such a key in this, because if we're not in the right mindset, we're not going to make the right decisions. So, when we're upset, it's really hard to focus. And in order to make good decisions, we have to have good focus. And it's all this connected tissue that we have as coaches that we have to keep in mind of these players. And so, that's kind of one thing, as you guys were talking, I'm just thinking how important it is for us to keep talking about a positive mindset, because it all plays into how well we're going to make decisions.
Just to bring this full circle, talking about the skills, the biggest advantage that I have found, especially as we've worked with 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, even 4-on-4, 5-on-5, it sometimes can get a little lost, but especially when you're down in the 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, you are able to work with players on their individual skills, all of them. And I think back to our point, which comes first and which is most important, it's yes, all of them are. To be a good basketball player, you have to be able to do all of those things. And probably for most of us, if we are asked, especially at the high school level, but it's felt no matter what level you're on, there's not enough time. And so for us as coaches, we're constantly thinking, how can we maximize the time that we have and get these players as many reps as we can get them to actually help them become better basketball players, better decision makers. And that only comes through playing, that only comes through competing, and that only comes through maximizing your time. So I appreciate all of those who joined us tonight. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed, please feel free to reach out. I know these guys and they're great. They're on social media. They'll answer emails. We are approaching the basketball season. Everybody is. So they are a little bit busier, but I know that eventually they'll get back to you. I appreciate Hudl and all that they do, and appreciate them for even hosting this event. We hope that you enjoy the rest of Swish 21.